Why are black people still Christians? We're going to answer that question, but before we do, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I came across a video. It's about a year old, and a brother, Garrison Hayes, put out that he is asking the question, and then I guess he's making the case why black people shouldn't be Christians. Now, what's kind of strengthening this argument here is he is an ex-pastor. He's going to say that he is still a Christian. But then we can say, well, what kind of Christian? And I'm not meaning that in any kind of disparaging way. See, in our culture, there are, you could almost say there are two different camps, maybe three different camps of Christian in our American culture. There is the progressive Christian, there is the conservative Christian, and then I'm going to say there's the biblical Christians. So I'm taking a moment to explain that, because a lot of people think they don't know where the dividing lines are. Conservative Christians are those who hold to a political agenda, though they are conservative. Now, arguably, pretty much all Christians in some form or way are conservative by the conservative definition. Core values, family values, Christian values. So to that degree, pretty much all Christians are conservative. However, obviously there is clear dividing lines onto how that is defined to each group. Now, the conservative Christians will say we hold to conservative values. Now, conservative values shouldn't be mixed up with biblical values, although they extract from their values from the Bible. So today, how that looks is the Republican Party. Now, conservatives are not only tied to the Republican Party, but that's how it's going to show up in the voting polls. So this is why you see a lot of white Christians, conservative Christians, supporting Trump. And the reason why primarily is because they think he is going to usher in their Christian conservative platform. Now, on the other hand, you have the progressive Christians. Now, the progressive Christians, they're those that they have a more liberal view of the Bible, and it's going to show up more from a social, political, or social justice perspective. So that's how it shows up. Now, again, this is just, now, Garrison Hayes would be more of a progressive Christian, in my opinion, okay? And when he says that he's an ex-pastor, that's kind of in the confines of him. He is an ex-pastor, but then his Christian views would sort of line more on the progressive side. Now, I have been aware of Garrison from his YouTube and some of his appearances on different, you could say, progressive shows. And I think he makes a very good argument. So I love to hear him make the arguments. And he certainly makes the arguments against the conservative side, or Republicans. Now, the other group of Christians would be those that are biblical Christians. And they hold to the Bible. They follow the Bible. They teach the Bible. And from that perspective, they cannot align with either side, whether Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. Because both of those sides in some way violate the Bible itself. Now, I'm not going to get too far into that. But as I said, Garrison, in his then, and you're going to see his argument, why are black people Christians? So I'll let him make his point from the video and then respond. So let's get into it. Now, I'll do a quick service announcement. Here is the title of the video. Why are black people still Christians? And as you can see, it has over 562,000 views, and it came out a year ago. Like I say, he's still, let me read his description though. If God exists, why does he allow black people to suffer the way that they do? And we're going to answer that. For starters, Christianity has been used a brutal tool of oppression against black folk for as long as this country has existed. Outside the U.S., Christianity and the Bible motivate colonizers to commit some of the worst atrocities the planet has ever seen. Let me see, he has more here. And then he says, the track of this religion is clear, and it isn't looking great. So why did black Christians, when surveyed by Pew Research Center, identify as Christians at nearly 80%? Significantly more than their non-black peers. That's what I want to talk about in this video. And I spoke to a black woman pastor who sees herself represented in Jesus, as well as the black professor who identifies as atheist and sees no evidence of no evidence of a God interest in the oppressed. And at the end, I'll wrestle with my own journey around faith. I hope you'll enjoy it. Now, that's his kind of description of the video. Why are black people still Christians? Let me also say, especially because of the high viewership, YouTube may interrupt with ads. And if that happens, I should say, yeah, I will quickly scroll through as fast as I can. They usually let me do so. They come on, use just a few seconds. All right, here we go. Mr. Garrison Hayes. Did I? Yeah, yes, I did. I just wanted to make sure I pronounce his name right. All right, here we go.
One of the first slave ships that brought black people to the New World was named Jesus. White Christians used Bible verses and Bible stories to justify slavery. There was a time when white Christians wouldn't baptize black people because they weren't sure if it was okay to enslave Christians. They quickly changed their theology, baptized their black slaves, and forthrightly sent them back to the fields to work. 4, both black and white prosperity preachers have scammed millions of dollars from faithful black parishioners living in American slums. 5, it is an undeniable fact that Christianity has been a tool of oppression for black people all throughout the world. And yet today, black...
Now, let me stop, and I'm going to say this. All of what he just said is true. It is a scathing indictment, especially on the white Christian church. What I'm going to say up front is that has nothing to do with what the Bible actually says. So, yeah, they did it, but let's see if he will get into and exploring what the Bible then actually teaches.
Americans identify as Christians at a staggering 79%, higher than any other group in this country. So the question is, why are black people still Christians? And while we're at it, I actually think...
So, in order to answer that question, because he's coming from a social perspective, not a biblical perspective. So let me answer the question. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to first answer the question from my perspective. Okay, from my perspective. Why am I a Christian? So let me do this. Let's go to Romans. These are, by the way, these are verses he will no doubt know. So I'm going to Romans chapter 3, and I'm going to read just a few verses, because again, he asked the question, right? Why are black Christians? Why are black people Christians? I'm a black person and I'm a Christian. So now look at verse 19. It says, now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may become subject to God's judgment. For no one will be justified in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. Now, I want to go through back to chapter 1, because I'm going to tell you where, to me, the argument itself goes wrong. Here we go. This is chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So let's stop for a moment. I want you to see that God's wrath is not singularly singling out any one group of people, but notice all groups of people. All right. So back to Romans 3. Here we go. So verse 19 again. Now we know that whatever the law said, it speaks to those who are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may become subject to God's judgment. So why am a black person such as I, a Christian? I don't want to be subject to God's judgment. And then he says, for no one will be justified in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. But now, apart from the law, God's righteousness, and this word righteousness means being in good standing with God, being in a right place with God, which he just told us that apart from this, we are not in a good place with God. We are unrighteous, that we cannot be in a good place with God. God's wrath is against all unrighteousness. God's wrath is against those who do not measure up to God's righteousness. So he says that is God's righteousness through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe, since there is no distinction. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God presented him as propitiation through faith in his blood to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his restraint, God passed over the sins previously committed. God presented him to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so that he would be righteous and declared righteous, the one who has faith in Jesus. So that's just a small snippet, right? If I also wanted to go to one more verse of scripture before we move on, because I want this in your head as we move and answer his questions, because the premise of his question it's come from a false equivalency and a false premises. When you ask the question, why are black people, and then you equate your answer to white Christianity or what whites have done. So this is famous verse, John 3:16, for God loved the world in this way. He gave his son, he gave his one and only son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. So to answer the question, this is why, as a black man, I'm a Christian. Okay? Because God loved me, because God gave his son for me. So that's the premise of why, if you ask why I'm a Christian, well, there it is. That's why I'm a Christian. Now, if you want to even break it down kind of further and say, well, then if you talk about the word Christian and then the religion of Christianity itself, which I know he's going to do, remember the Pharisees were the most religious people at that time. They were the most revered religious sect. They were the conservatives of the day. The Sadducees were the progressive, but the Pharisees were the conservative. And Jesus made it quite clear that he was distinct from them. And yet you could say they did the same thing. Remember, they ultimately orchestrated the trial and then crucifixion of Jesus. And then went on after that to maintain their religious positions. All right, so let's get back to the video. So I want that in your mind as we now go forward to look at his argument.
A more pressing, more existential question that needs an answer. Does God hate black people? In nearly every country, on every continent around the world, darker skinned people are treated poorly. By nearly every measurable standard, so-called black people are at the bottom of the social hierarchy everywhere. So much so that in majority black countries like Haiti and Nigeria, skin lightening creams are wildly popular. Anything to gain some proximity to whiteness and some distance from blackness. Africa is
Okay, so he asked the question, does God hate black people? We just read where God is against all unrighteousness. Now, so you're looking at the question through a particular social prism. Then as if, let's say that black people are not guilty of something. Now, while I understand what he's talking about, that it does seem like, right, that you have colonizers, which he's going to get to, that have conquered black skin all over the world, colonizers. So wherever colonizers went, European, that's what he's talking about, European colonizers that have conquered black skin, the question is, why does God allow that? Now let's go back in history for a moment. Let's go back in history and look at it from, because black people like to claim Egypt, right? They like to claim Egypt, but at one point, did not Egypt rule the world? Did they not enslave the Jewish people for 400 years? So at that time, were they the oppressed or were they the oppressors? Okay. All right.
rich with natural resources, boundless human potential, unfathomable wisdom, and brilliant cultural traditions.
I'm going to stop and say, if you're going to say that they're wisdom, then why are they conquered? Why is the vast continent of Africa still not advanced? Why are the various nations of Africa not advanced?
Yet, colonial powers have pillaged, exploited, and divided nations and people in ways that are frankly irreparable.
So is that God's fault that colonizers, right, have done what they have done to the African nations? Again, is that God's fault? I'm going to jump ahead and then ask this question, because in connection to his question, looking at the plight of black people, the condition of black people worldwide, now he's asking the question, has God forsaken the black man? Looking at his thing, has God, does God, he has another video too that says, does God hate black people? But have black people reached out to God? Let's answer that question as well. If you look at the vast African nations, have they reached out to God? Have they sought the Lord? Have they asked for God mercy? All right.
All without consequence. I mean, I don't know. You'd think that God would help us out a little bit. We've been through a lot, God. Maybe there's a Bible verse that we can look to.
Let's stop. He asked for a Bible verse. Let's give him one. For God loved the world in this way, that he gave his only begotten Son. Whoever believed in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay. This is the question here. Here's the answer. Have they believed on the Lord? They've had the gospel. The gospel was preached to them. All right. Remember over here where he said, but now since all of the world, right? All of the world. And by the way, remember too, we have had four world dominating kingdoms. And then before that, you had at least two that I can come to mind, mighty kingdom. In other words, they were the mightiest kingdom at the time. One of them was the Egyptian kingdom. The other one was the Assyrian kingdom. They didn't rule the world, but they were certainly the mightiest. You dare not go against them. My point is that throughout time, there have been different people who have been in control, as it were. So now when he asks the question and say, help us out, God, well, did God send help? How have they responded to the help that God sent? All right, let's go back.
The Lord will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not be beneath. Who is this verse about?
Well, let's be fair. It's about Israel. He was talking to Israel. That's Deuteronomy 28. And that's not black Hebrew. I don't know if he's coming from a black Hebrew Israelite perspective, but the black Hebrew Israelites have taken Deuteronomy 28 and applied it to them, black people, and said that they were the black Jews. They were the black Hebrews. They were Judah. That Judah were black people. So if that's true, and I always ask black Hebrewites, where is your genealogy that ties you back to Abraham? So Moses wrote this on the last day of his life, the book of Deuteronomy, and the 28th chapter was to the Israelites. All right.
Not only do black people identify as Christians at a higher rate, half of black Americans report attending church at least once a week. I was one of them. In fact, I was a pastor for a number of years. I've preached all over the country and world. I've given Bible studies. I've baptized folks. I have been in it, and these questions have been nagging me for a while. So in this video,
I'm trying to think here. Let me go back because right here, let's see.
some answers. I talked to a couple of people. One of them is my friend Claudia. Have been nagging me for
This person here, I may be wrong. I'm just trying to kind of get the church that he's a part of, and I thought this person was one, but I'm not going to say who he is. But okay, I don't know. See, I don't know what church he was a part of. But let me answer this: he is a part of look like some kind of church structure. And guess what? The church structure that he's a part of, is he not free? In other words, what's the struggle as far as him and his church? Was the Klan bursting down their doors, bombing their churches, burning crosses?
a while. So in this video, we're going to get some answers. I talked to a couple of people. One of them is my friend Claudia.
My name is Claudia Allen.
She is easily one of the most conscious people I know. She's well-read, tapped into history and literature, a person who is thinking about race, class, and power in very critical ways. But she's also a Christian, a preacher, and a committed member of her church.
There is no other people.
Now I'm going to stop it right here because I'm going to come back and pick it up at this point in part 2. Okay. I'm going to pick it up in part 2. And you can see how he's going to structure the argument. Now, he said he's an ex-pastor or minister. But again, how he frames the argument is not a fair one. Because again, this could be, his questions could be applied to any group of people. Any group. In other words, throughout human history, that there were times when the stronger always oppressed. So we see it now with Ukraine. They're the oppressed. Russia is oppressing them. On a much smaller scale, of course. So I'm going to get more into it in part 2. And then I will, again, continue to break down his argument when he asks the question, why are black people still Christians? So let me throw back. Why not? Why not? And let's see if he gives a better alternative as a Christian. All right. Because I will. Let me just say that. I will give a better alternative to his answer. All right, guys. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in part 2 of Why Are Black People Still Christians?